سامپوزیوم پارلمانی در بریتانیا، کم پیشرفت و گزینه‌های سیاست در قبال ایران.
Lord Clark has been a very long time supporter of this campaign. He was a distinguished chairman of the Labour Party, and I well remember at the Labour Party conference he chaired in Blackpool, and there's a delegation up in the gallery from the National Council of Resistance of Iran, and Tony drew attention to them, and conference rose to its feet to applaud them. Lord Clark.
Good afternoon, friends. As always, it's a great pleasure to be among so many people who support the Iranian people. In particular, today that support is shown for the residents of Camp Ashraf. That we are still holding meetings to discuss the plight and suffering of the residents in Ashraf is in itself a disgrace. It's gone on far too long, and it should have been ended some time ago. Robin, you were kind enough to mention Madam Rajavi's comments and the fear that is probably going through the mullahs as they sit, because they'll get a copy of what Madam Rajavi has said, and her comments about the youth of her country, her comments about putting the blame and the responsibility for much of the problems in that region, and that we should be concentrating on the main threat. And the main threat is, of course, the mullahs' regime in Tehran and Iran. When Madam Rajavi calls on us to redouble the efforts to end the proscription, especially in the United States of America, we should be listening and redoubling our efforts to make sure that nobody forgets how we had to go through the courts here, as Robin has mentioned. But as the people in Ashraf continue to suffer both physical and mental suffering, the international community, to its shame, remains silent. Shame is also a word I would use when describing the actions of our government here in the UK. I'll temper what I'm saying about the government, because my comments really about my own government, and Robbie just mentioned something that I was part of all those years ago. And I would confess that the British Labour government for those years acted with shame. They followed a policy of appeasement when they should have been really pushing for meaningful sanctions to get some beef behind the demands, the legitimate demands of the Iranian people. Robin has made, I've said again, some of you will have heard this before, but Robin's mentioned it. The day the list came out for the prescription, they lumped them all together. Some of us went over to see Jack Straw within a couple of days of the announcement, and I recalled to face with him in his office, not far from here. I said, "Do you remember, Jack, when Madam Rajavi and others were being applauded by our conference, and the day that they were in the gallery, and as chairman of the conference, I said, our friends are there, and the conference rose to applaud them." I said, "What has happened, Jack?" I'll never forget the words. He said, "Tony, we're in government now. Government of appeasement for the mullahs, for what was in it for them. I find it appallingly disgraceful that a party that I belong to should produce people to say such things." And as I've said before in the House of Lords, how can you have biased footage of men with chains beating defenceless women? If that's biased, well, words again fail me. But he went on to say, having people gathering and parking outside the entrance of Camp Ashraf with the loudspeakers and the throwing of stones is something more than a disturbance. It's a sort of a provocation, and it appears to be organised or permitted by the Iraqi government. This is a pattern which could build up through intimidation to something much more serious. Although this is Iraqi sovereign territory, the minister went on to say the Iraqi government must act. He said they must act All the authorities outside, including ourselves, and all those countries and institutions that uphold civilised values must press for this to avoid becoming a tragedy which it otherwise threatens to become. And I was delighted to hear it. It was unequivocal. It was coming straight from a minister who clearly understood people in Ashraf, the residents, are suffering with those loudspeakers, and Robin's mentioned the denial of medical aid. Colleagues and friends, we have to do a bit more than just protest. We should demand that when the evil regime is finally put to flight, as it surely will be, we in Britain should look at ways for compensating the Iranian people for what I believe has been our neglect for over such a long period. In the short term, we must support the efforts of our friends in the United States Senate. Yes, we've got them, and their voices are being heard now. They've expressed concern about the welfare and well-being of the people of Ashraf. Voices like Senator John McCain, who told the US Senate Committee on Armed Service only 11 days ago that he hoped that the committee would address the issue of giving assurance of the American governments and Iraq governments of their commitment to their security. They actually gave that guarantee when they handed over responsibility to the Iraqi government, and thankfully we've got voices now in the American Senate reminding the world of what's gone on. The chairman of the committee is Senator Carl Levin. In thanking Senator McCain, he said, "We share your concern about the group you have mentioned," and he relayed that concern over to Mr. James Jeffrey, the US ambassador to Iraq. He was standing there as a witness. Senator McCain expressed the hope that, Ambassador, you will make some representations to the Iraqi government concerning the situation in Camp Ashraf. Well, let's hope he does it. Let's hope he does it quickly, because that is the power that we need to have behind our arguments. Now that we've got to speak even louder. We have to demand that the United Nations acknowledges the need to proclaim the Ashraf people that they should be protected by the 4th Geneva Convention and the creation of a meaningful monitoring term from UNAMI inside Ashraf. For the people of Iran, we should repeat our call for proper sanctions against the regime. Diplomatic sanctions, armed sanctions, economic and oil sanctions. They should all be utilised in an effort to rid the world of these wicked people. Political and economic ties must be cut off for as long as the mullahs defy the international community over its nuclear and human rights violations. We must seek support for those who call for the lifting of the ban of the PMI in the United States. We have to pledge our support for Madam Rajavi, and her words today are, as always, an inspiration to us all to continue the fight. And we will fight it today and for as long as it takes. Long live the free Iran.
Let me just quicken out. Now, Brian Bentley, a Conservative MP, I'm going to ask him next. Let me just say who's here. Baroness Boothroyd, a former Speaker of the House of Commons. Steve McCabe, a former Government Whip. Roger Gale, a Conservative MP. Ken McGuinness, who sits on the crossbenches in the House of Lords. Just a minute, my mind's gone blank. Julian, I'm so sorry. Julian Lewis, I'm so sorry. And, of course, David Vaughan, who's a very distinguished barrister of this town, who helped us with the cases both here and at the court in Luxembourg. My good friend Peter Archer, Lord Archer of Sandwell, his neighbour when Peter was in the House of Commons, Tarzan King, Lord King, Claire Miskin, a solicitor or barrister, Claire? One or the other. But something famous in the law.
Barrister.
And Baroness Turner, who is a lifelong, taken a lifelong interest and activist in the trade union movement. And
Matthew Offord.
Matthew Offord. Matthew Offord is a Conservative MP. Brian Bentley.
Ladies and gentlemen, if ever there was a more fitting time for a meeting such as this, I can't think of it. As North African and Middle Eastern leaders get dragged kicking and streaming towards change, a great impetus is given to the people of Iran to do the same in their own homeland. And we shouldn't forget that the beginning of the present form of mass protests began in Tehran over a year ago, when anti-government demonstrations shook the Iranian government to the core. Over a year on, the regime still struggles to prevent further unrest through the use of torture and mass execution. These are the actions of a weak regime, fearing for its future. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the Iranian regime is right to be running scared because change is coming. And that leads me on to the PMOI and the 3,400 members, supporters of that organisation based at Camp Ashraf. We have long heard the lunatic ramblings of the Iranian regime describing the PMOI as a grouplet, lacking any significance whatsoever. You may well ask why it is that the Iranian regime, which describes the PMOI as insignificant, places the group at the top of its agenda on each and every occasion it enters into negotiations with the West. So much for a grouplet. The answer is simple. The PMOI advocates and promotes the ideals of democratic change in Iran. Democratic change which the tyrant leaders of that country know will eventually bring their downfall, and the sooner the better. The demand that the Iranian leaders have always made of the West during negotiations over its nuclear ambitions has been that the PMOI be blacklisted as a terrorist organisation. Sadly, in a vain attempt to appease Tehran's tyrants, a number of countries blacklisted the PMOI, and that organisation has taken its battle, thank God, for recognition as a legitimate opposition group through the British, European and now the USA courts. I'm proud that I was one of the 35 appellants who took the previous government through the courts in this country, demanding that the PMOI be removed from the UK blacklist. With the government unable to produce a shred of evidence worthy of note, their decision to blacklist the PMOI was found to be perverse, as you have heard, and they were ordered immediately to remove the PMOI from that blacklist. Ultimately, after appealing to the High Court, the government was forced to do so. Sadly, however, WikiLeaks now reveal the genuine thoughts of the British government during the period of our court action. Behind the scenes, the government was bowing its knee to Tehran and apologising for the fact that our courts had forced them to remove the name of the PMOI from the blacklist. They apologised that justice prevailed. How shameful is that? Having prevailed in the UK and through the UK courts, and with WikiLeaks revelations highlighting the political nature of the ban in the US as well as in Europe, it's high time our good friends in the US government remove the PMOI from their list of banned organisations and remove this hurdle from the path of the Iranian people's struggle for democracy. To do anything less would be to besmirch their good name. But to do the act would enhance its standing throughout the world at this vital time. And I appeal, I beg, I urge the Obama government to do it and do it quickly. Mr. Chairman, you know that the ban not only affects the group's struggle for democracy, but it is used by the Iraqi authorities to justify the murder and the torture of Camp Ashraf residents. And it will be used further by the Iranian regime to justify executing the very people who are demanding freedom and democracy in Iran itself. Camp Ashraf has now been under siege for over 2 years. The residents are facing daily psychological torture and direct violent attacks. We should expect the British government, the EU, the US and the UN to abide by their obligations under international law. The demands we have for Camp Ashraf are simple: that those institutions do as they promised to do under international law. The US authorities must assume control of the safety and security of Camp Ashraf, while the entire international community must demand that the 180 loudspeakers used to torture the residents are removed and the suppression of Ashraf ends now. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, there are a number of simple policy steps we must take with regard to Iran. Firstly, we must intensify sanctions against that regime to ensure its financial hands are tied. Further, we must also support the Iranian opposition movement and those groups demanding democratic change. The Obama administration should remove the PMOI from the list of banned organizations in the US, as the DC Court of Appeal has decreed, and allow this group, dedicated to freedom, democracy and secularism, to promote the democratic future of Iran. We should expect nothing less. Freedom and democracy has raged like a bushfire throughout Eastern Europe, South America and Southeast Asia over the last 30 years. It is now warming the hearts and minds of the peoples of North Africa and the Middle East. It would indeed be ironic if we didn't play our part at this pivotal time. Let us make sure we do.
Julian Lewis is a member of the government party in the House of Commons.
Ladies and gentlemen, when I was a brand new MP back in 1997, I was first approached by representatives of the PMOI, and they explained to me the difficulties they were having. And I said to them that the only way they could possibly proceed was to get this designation of being labelled a terrorist organisation removed. Now, when I gave that rather obvious advice, I never dreamt of the way in which they would succeed so successfully in mobilising members of both houses of Parliament to their cause. And over the years, as I disappeared into the anonymity of the front bench, being what's called a shadow junior minister, I would ask questions about, well, why it was that this organisation still seemed to be listed, and all I would get would be blanket assurances from Foreign Office ministers from the then Labour government. I was an opposition MP, of course, that there were very good reasons for this. Quite what those good reasons were, I never found out, but what I did find out was that the sheer persistence of the campaign which Lord Corbett and all his parliamentary colleagues had waged had led to a situation that, when examined forensically in the courts of this country, it was decreed that that label was unjust. And I'm here today, as I say, for two reasons. The first reason is that I have to keep my part of the bargain. You've done your part of the bargain, now I've got to do mine. And finally, the second reason is the humanitarian reason, which we've heard so much about 3,000 people plus who are in danger of their lives in a hostile environment. Now, I grew up with some awareness of the atrocities and the massacres of the Second World War. And one of the things that really sticks in your gut a bit is when atrocities have happened and then everybody goes around saying how terrible this was and how was it that nobody could do anything about it and that they let it happen. And it's our duty to make sure, as far as Camp Ashraf is concerned, that that atrocity never happens. Those are my two reasons. Good luck.
Steve McCabe, who was one of my colleagues when I was an MP in the great city of Birmingham.
But distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's really nice to be with you today. It's great to see so many of you, and I have to say what a remarkably patient group of people you are. What I think we should do is record all these speeches and insist that President Ahmadinejad has to watch them over and over again. I think that would be a much better use. Look, I just want to make a couple of very brief and obvious comments. I think we've heard the main arguments well put by the other speakers. But the simple thing is, you can't, as a Democrat, listen to Prime Minister Cameron or President Obama call for supporting the Egyptian people in an orderly transition and simultaneously turn a blind eye to the violence and thuggery that occurs in Iran when the Iranian people do the same thing. And you can't call for an orderly transition and turn a deaf ear to Ayatollah Khamenei, has said quite publicly that he wants to install an Islamic Republic in Egypt. That's his ambition. If we want a democratic transition, we're going to have to stand up for the people in Iran who want that kind of change. Now, this seems to me dead obvious. For the West, we should support our friends who are the opposition. That's the best way to achieve orderly progress and a decent transition. So I don't think we should be cowed by their approach to human rights. We should stand with the Iranian people who are opposing it. I don't think we should try to appease them over nuclear weapons. The time for talking over that is finished. They either have to abide by the UN agreements or they have to go. And we most certainly should not be cowed by a regime that is intent on creating war throughout the Middle East. We should not put up with that. We should make it abundantly clear. And there can be no better beacon for what the Iranian people are trying to achieve than what's happening at Ashraf. We should stand with the people of Ashraf, and we should demand that the United Nations play its proper role in protecting them and standing up to the abuses, the excesses and the violence that are going on there. And we should make it clear that sanctions are designed to cripple this regime. There is no point in token sanctions. The object of this exercise is to stop them having the economic resources to carry out a reign of terror in their own country and promote a reign of terror across the globe. And finally, as every other speaker has pointed out, you cannot do that by banning one of the opposition groups. You cannot do that by listing one of the main opposition groups as a terrorist group. What we must do is persuade our American friends to fall into line, to delist the PMOI, and for us all to stand up for the people who can make a difference in Iran.
Thank you very much indeed, Steve. Ken McGuinness, Lord McGuinness.
Parliamentary colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, my good friends from the Iranian resistance, it's a pleasure to be with you this evening. Can I say I was a village schoolmaster for 28 years. I was a major in the army. One thing that I noticed today and I'm grateful for it, is that the press have turned out in strength. Thank you for being here. Because, ladies and gentlemen, I want to see on our broadsheets tomorrow morning and in the future, I want to see a photograph of those 180 loudspeakers that are used to inflict psychological warfare, psychological torment on the people of Camp Ashraf. Nations should know what is happening. President Obama, I thought, when he was elected, was a signal of reconciliation for the future. And I'm so disappointed that he has not implemented the rulings of his own court that the PMOI are not a terrorist organization. It is ironic that the Iranian regime are congratulating the Egyptians on their progress over the last week. Did they not notice that whatever we think about Mubarak and his regime, he did not, nor did the army, slaughter the ordinary people of Egypt, but had to pay with their lives for so doing. So all I have to say in conclusion is this. So what? Are you going to write to the press? Are you going to play your part in carrying out a campaign to free the millions of people in Iran to whom we have a duty? Are you going to write to the government and say, you had an obligation, you have an obligation, along with our American allies, not to walk out of Iraq and leave 3,500 people in Camp Ashraf at the mercy of those who would starve them, who would deny them health, drugs and hospital treatment? I hope those of us who are here will carry from this hall this evening. It's a great encouragement. God bless you.
Baroness Turner, Muriel Turner, has been a stalwart of this campaign, and she brings her special knowledge and involvement over, let's just settle for several years, shall we, Muriel, of the trade union movement in this country. You can do it from there if you prefer. Of course you can, yes.
I'm delighted to come to this meeting this afternoon. I have been associated with your committee, Mr. Chairman, now for some time. I first became involved when I learnt about the PMI and about Madam Rajavi and her campaign for democratic rights within Iran, and in particular the part in which women played in her organisation. Because, as you know, I have always been very interested in women's rights, and it has always seemed to me appalling that the Iranian government applies its repression, in particular, to women. So you see appalling pictures sometimes of the kind of brutality inflicted upon the female population. Madam Rajavi has an agenda for equality, and that, I think, makes me very, very supportive of everything that she is doing. But what has most concerned about the members of our committee, including myself, is the treatment of friends in the Ashraf camp. It really is quite appalling. We've raised this on several occasions in Parliament under your chairmanship, Mr. Chairman, and we've had a number of varying sorts of replies from our government. But quite frankly, a situation in which these people, who include women, have been psychologically abused by these loudspeakers, apparently 180 loudspeakers, this awful noise which psychologically disturbs them. In addition to that, there has been persecution. They have not been able to have access to medical care and to food. And that is quite appalling. And then on top of that, there have been the invasion, so to speak, by these thugs who have been beating up the people concerned, including, I believe, 176 people have actually been wounded. And we told our government so in a recent set of questions put in the House of Lords. We have to say this has to stop. We've said so very loud to our government and urged them that they should do everything they possibly can to stop this from happening. We have urged that the UN should exercise the powers that it has to protect these people. They deserve our protection. They consist of some very, very courageous people who've had the nerve to oppose an undemocratic government in their own country, and they deserve our protection as asylum seekers and as courageous fighters for democratic truth and justice. So we shall continue to fight for them the best we can and do everything we can to ensure that they are free, not so much freed, but given the protection that they require. And as previous speakers have said, we have to ensure also that our allies, the United States, ensures that they are properly protected. And in addition, we have, I think, in this meeting, to salute the courage of people in Iran who are opposing the current government and continue to do so. It takes enormous courage to oppose a government that occupies an undemocratic situation and in which it also constantly applies brutal processes to keep people quiet. They won't remain quiet. I'm glad to say that we have people there who are courageous enough to stand up for the ideals that we have supported in this country for many years, and hopefully, in not too long a time, they will be victorious. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Muriel. The barrister Claire Miskin, who has been, again, a very, very active supporter of this campaign over many years, is among a galaxy of people from the legal profession who have encouraged and helped us from time to time in what we've been about. So Claire, do just say a few words to us, please.
Some time ago, when there was an attack, a yet further attack on Ashraf, I and Lord Corbett, together with a number of supporters of the PMOI in this country, went to demonstrate outside the American embassy. This demonstration was subsequently described by a reporter as, quote, a rather noisy demonstration. And Lord Corbett and I, meanwhile, stood there and watched while people, all women, who had been on hunger strike, some of them on dry hunger strike, which means that they'd had no water as well as no food, were carried in on stretchers. And if there's one criticism that I have of the United Nations, it is this: the residents of Ashraf are educated, civilized, people who wish only to express their own view. They've caused no trouble to the Iraqis. These are protected persons under the Geneva Convention. So come on, United Nations, get your act together. Tarleton King, Lord King of West Bromwich, would you like to say?
Ladies and gentlemen, we talk about this problem whole afternoon, so I'm not going to repeat those things which have been said already. I simply say we look on these things on three bases. Firstly, PMOI. Secondly, the plight of Ashraf residents. And thirdly, Iran. And it had quite a struggle in this country from my fellow parliamentarians and other people to get them off that list. And I can't understand that a country like America, they still keep them on that list. And secondly, I think when you look on Ashraf residents, they have suffered quite a lot. And people will say, what can we do? It is a sovereign state, we can't interfere. I don't think that is strictly true. Now coming back to Iran, the Prime Minister or President there should learn his lesson from his fellow presidents. That is from Tunisia, from Egypt, and other countries are rising up to that thing as well. So he should learn his lesson and learn it soon. But in the long run, I think public opinion will catch up with him and you can't survive too long. So these are my three messages on those three topics. Thank you.
Lord Fraser of Carmiley. Come all the way from Scotland to be with us.
Thank you, Robin. I think the decision by the Court of Appeal in Washington is an exceptionally good one. I also like the idea that there has been the clear recognition by that court that not only is there a judicial process to be gone through, but there is also a political process to be gone through. And it seems to me that that decision recognizes implicitly what is to be required. However, we can rise in applause when the Secretary of State for the United States of America decides that the PMOI should be delisted. Thank you very much.
David Amos, a long-time colleague of mine, there's no doubting his great, strong support for this campaign.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, we meet tonight at a historic moment in the history of our world. We meet when the suppressed are rising. We meet when the suppressed are turning. On either side of you, you can see a statement on Iran. And that is an early day motion that has been signed by 500 parliamentarians. So there you are, ladies and gentlemen. Parliamentarians are also rising, speaking out on your behalf. And I don't know, Chairman, whether it was divine intervention, but what brilliant timing for this rally today. Absolutely brilliant.
I've got friends around the place.
I'm sure you have. As North America and the Middle East revels in unprecedented demonstrations and the movement towards democratic changes intensifies across the region, Iran's destructive influences must be curtailed to ensure this wave of democracy prevails. Ever since the revolution in 1979 was hijacked by the current Iranian regime, they have done nothing to hide their aims of dominating the region with the spread of their vile form of Islamic fundamentalism. Fundamentalism, ladies and gentlemen, which sees women and children hanged on cranes in Iran's city centres. Fundamentalism, which sees women and children lashed in public and tortured in Iran's notorious prisons. And finally, fundamentalism, which has had a direct role to play in the murder of British troops in the region and the terrorism which we saw all too vividly on the 7th of July 2005 in London. The actions of the Iraqi authorities in the last 2 years in Camp Ashraf have left 11 residents killed, hundreds seriously wounded, and many others denied access to life-saving medical equipment and treatment. On our watch, ladies and gentlemen, the watch of the Coalition and the United Nations, we entered Iraq to allow democracy to prevail, not to see democratic friends such as the Camp Ashraf residents attacked by savage Iranian regime agents. We must do, ladies and gentlemen, what is right. We must carry out our legal duties and protect the groups of Iranians whose sole aim is a future Iran built upon the foundations of democracy and respect for human rights. The threat of a nuclear-armed regime with such fundamentalist ideals does not require explaining. So we must therefore tie the hands of the Iranian regime by implementing stringent sanctions. I was dismayed to read recent WikiLeaks revelations showing British firms making millions in areas where sanctions should have been enforced. That, ladies and gentlemen, is simply not acceptable. So we must tie the hands of the regime. We must untie the hands of the Iranian resistance movement. There must be an immediate US removal of the PMOI from their blacklist, a ban which has no legal credibility following the decisions of the United Kingdom, the European Union and the United States courts. Further, we must protect the Camp Ashraf residents by making representations requesting the United States of America to reassume control over the safety and security of the camp, thereby removing the 180 loudspeakers and further requesting that the United Nations set up a full-time presence there. So, ladies and gentlemen, let us stand on the side of democracy. Let us support the PMOI, whose ideals fall directly in line with our own aims for a democratic region. Let us rid its greatest foe, ladies and gentlemen, the Iranian regime.
Dalet Nirouzi is the UK representative for the National Council of Resistance of Iran.
First of all, pay my greatest tribute and gratitude and appreciation to members of Parliament from both houses, from all three major parties that stood with us, with our movement for many years. They strived inch by inch to remove many obstacles and to get us to where we are. Since last night, there's been protests, scattered demonstrations throughout the country, particularly in Tehran. We hope and we will have our fingers crossed and follow the trends of events in Tehran, particularly now that it actually marks the 31st anniversary of Iran's biggest revolution in 31st years now against dictatorship to bring about democracy.
And in great part I do want to thank you, not just for your attendance, but for your enthusiasm and for your patience while these proceedings have been going on. They will of course be shown via the Resistance television right across Iran, and of course for those in Camp Ashraf to see. And I'm also able to tell you that the last debate we had in the House of Lords on Iran and Iraq, the government minister gave an undertaking that he would try to facilitate a visit by an all-party group of MPs and peers to Camp Ashraf. We wait to see the response of the Iraqi government to that, given they keep on chorusing about their belief in free speech and the right of human rights and respect for human rights and the rest of it. Well, we want to go there and see for ourselves what is happening in Ashraf, and we will judge them by their response. So, Salam Ashraf, we're on our way. Thank you very much indeed.